A very good morning to all of you. I promise you that I did not meet Srinivas before. I didn't put him up to all that. Called me a karma yogi and all that. I'm not too sure if I'm worth it, but thank you, Srinivas Garu, for those really, really kind words. A very good morning to the entire team of NHRD, Mr. Nathan, Vipul, Srinivas, to all the distinguished delegates who have come from, I'm told, about 25 different states and 50 different cities across the nation. Warm welcome to all of you, to this wonderful city of ours, Hyderabad, to this wonderful state of ours, Telangana. The topic, that has been given to me is decoding the economic future and how Hyderabad can act as a catalyst for a 5 trillion economy. Before I get into the subject per se, let me quickly point out a couple of things. Yesterday, the budget was presented by the Union Finance Minister, and over the last several years, several decades, we've been hearing about numbers from every finance minister, every prime minister, every chief minister, every government representative on various forums. We've been hearing about how India is a compelling business opportunity. We've been hearing about how the world is looking at India, etc., etc. Before I talk about numbers, let me quickly give you a little bit of perspective, from being in politics and public life for the last 17 years. I was also a part of the private sector for about 7.5, 8 years in the US and also for some time in India as well. The one thing I've realized, both in public life and also when I was in the corporate sector, is that the biggest challenge for a leader, irrespective of who it is and what they run, at what institution they head. It could be a government headed in a state by a chief minister. It could be a government headed in a country by a prime minister or a president. Or it could be a corporate entity headed by a chief executive officer. The biggest challenge for any leader across the world is not wealth management or capital management. It actually is people management. Because the best of the people, in fact, deliver the goods and basically make an enterprise or an institution or an entity successful. That's a fact. Now, the case in point, I'd like to narrate a quick story. We always measure our economies in terms of trillions. We hear terms such as GDP, the gross domestic product, the gross state domestic product. We also hear terms such as per capita, etc., etc. But in my humble opinion, and without having to, I hope I'm not offending anybody when I say this, I think sometimes these can be misleading. The numbers, especially when it comes to numbers, it can be misleading. Because if you think about it for a minute, by virtue of our size as a nation, we are a 1.4 billion nation. We are, in fact, as of last week, if I am correct, we have recently surpassed China, and we are the most populous nation in the world today. So by sheer virtue of the size of our people, the size of our country, the population, the economy looks big. It is about $3.4 trillion now. But if you look at the per capita, by GDP, by economy, we're the 5th largest in the world. But if you look at per capita, we're actually the 142nd country in the world by per capita. Our per capita is only 2,400 USD. So the real measure, if you ask me, how does one understand the trillions of dollars of economy that is being talked about? How does one balance GDP and wealth? Now, for those of you who are wondering, what is the difference between GDP and wealth? If you ask me, GDP is a reflection, gross state domestic product, the 5 trillion, the $10 trillion, etc., are a reflection of the economic activity of a nation. It could be in the previous year, or GDP forecast could be about economic activity that is likely to unfold in the next quarter, in the next couple of quarters, or next 1 year, etc., etc. But what is the wealth of a nation? The wealth of a nation is actually a collection as a combination of its assets, both natural resources, its human resources, and how they are likely to influence the economic activity over a longer term, how the depreciation of these assets, these resources, the depletion of these resources, and how the utilization of these resources is intricately linked to ensuring long-term sustainable growth in line with the developmental aspirations of that particular nation. So let me not confuse you, without giving you examples. I'll give you two examples. Back in 1987, China and India, exactly 35 years ago, two countries with similar size of human resources, had the exact same size of GDP, 1987. But if you actually now move 35 years ahead and look at the current times and current date, China's economy is almost at $18 trillion, and we are languishing at $3.4 trillion. China's per capita is 13,000 US dollars. Our per capita is 2,400 US dollars. So what am I talking about here? What did China do that India didn't in the last 35 years? In my humble opinion, if I have to sum it up properly in one single line, I think China managed its aspirations, its developmental goals, and ensured that the natural resources and human resources were put to good effective use, and has competed with the West and the best in the world to ensure it reached where it is. But even China has a long way to go. If you look at the size of the economy versus the size of the people, huge difference. I'll give you one example of another Asian country which has done tremendously well purely because of the intellect of its people. Japan. All of you know the story of Japan, at least most of you, I would imagine, would know the story of Japan. It's a country with about 12.57 crore people, not even 1/10 of India. And it's a country whose geography, in fact, is so complicated that 75% of the country is uninhabitable. 75% of the country is mountainous. The topography is such that it's a very, very densely populated country across the coastal areas. And China, unfortunately, Japan is one of those countries which is surrounded by oceans. So it's had frequent tsunamis, cyclones, typhoons, earthquakes, very little natural resources, very little cultivable area. Only 11% of the land is cultivable, and very little area where humans can actually inhabit. And on top of all this, if you remember, in World War II, Japan is the only country on the planet which had been bombed. Hiroshima and Nagasaki, I'm sure all of you have heard. It's the only country which was ever under nuclear attack in 1940s. Now what happened then? Today Japan is the third largest economy in the world. In fact, until 2010, it was the second largest economy in the world. That's when China actually surpassed it. So what's happening in the world, if you think about it for a minute? India, with 140 crore people, with 40 crores of cultivable area, abundant natural resources, amazing talent, and most importantly, with a median age of 28, and with 65% of India being less than the age of 35, only has a 3.4 trillion economy. But Japan, with 12.57 crore people, with a median age of 49, has a 4.3 trillion economy with a per capita of 39,000 US dollars. So what is happening in these two countries, if you think for a minute? The one thing I can tell you that Japan has done successfully, has invested in the sectors that matter, has invested in its people, has ensured that the focus of the government, the collective goal, the collective national ambition, the collective national aspiration as a nation was very well defined, was extremely well etched in the minds of every Japanese, and they went about it with a single-minded pursuit. In India, unfortunately, while we do have leaders, while we do have many smart leaders, unfortunately our focus is always on politics. We're not focused on economics. Our focus is on winning the next election. Our focus is not in ensuring that the next generation has a better life than ours. That's the unfortunate challenge in India. We're in perennial election mode, including me. I'm not trying to say that we are any different. That's the unfortunate reality of being the world's largest democracy with elections happening throughout the year, and with every single politician, instead of being focused on economics, is always seized with more and more politics every single day. That's the problem with India right now. So what is it that I'm proposing? The question that I think we all need to ask ourselves is, should an economy, should a country's wealth be measured by numbers, by the 5 trillion numbers, by the 10 trillion or the 16 trillion numbers, or should it look at the most valuable asset that it possesses? In India's case, I think it's the think force that we have. India's think force, like I said, which is 65% with the median age of 35, 50% with the median age of 28. I think that's the biggest asset that India has. Unfortunately, not many countries have that. Like I said, Japan's median age is 49, China's median age is 39. I can go on. We're the youngest nation on the planet. But are we putting our human resources? Are we putting this human capital to good use? No. We have sociologically, psychologically as a nation. You know, I was at a couple of schools yesterday and day before, meeting and interacting with young minds, youngsters. I kept asking them. I kept probing. I said, are you happy with the infrastructure? They said, okay, we are reasonably happy. I said, do you want anything more? They said, we are fine. And I kept asking and I kept probing. I asked them one question. I said, what do you want to be once you graduate, once you become a graduate or a postgraduate? About 99% of them said, I want to actually be employed. I want to be seeking a job. When I asked them, why do you want to be a job seeker? Why can't you be a job creator?